Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John DeLynn. It's October 31st, Halloween, 2019. I hope you all have a fun and safe Halloween. Today, we are super excited to have back on Mormon Stories Laci Green. Laci is an author. She's a podcaster. She is a YouTuber. She's kind of I'd say, social media expert, and her area of expertise for a long time has been sex, sexuality, sex positivity, etc. We were super thrilled to have her recently on Mormon Stories Podcast to tell her epic story. It's heartwarming, it's thoughtful, it's heartbreaking, but it's also triumphant and inspiring. So make sure and check that out. After we got done with that episode, I realized we never actually talked about sexuality. I didn't in any way, really. It was just her story, and that's fine because her story stands on its own. But I thought it was a missed opportunity because she's an expert, and so I asked her if she'd come back. And we have some good news, by the way. You guys know about Thrive, the Thrive Conference, November 17th. Today, we're going to cross the threshold of 1,000 registrants. So we'll have over 1,000 people there, which is 3 times the amount we've ever had at one of our events. The last event we had that was large was the June Thrive event, which is about 270 people. Anyway, we're super excited for Thrive. Laci has said she's willing to come speak. So if you want to meet Laci yourself, along with Hans Matson, Jeremy Runnels, Natasha Helfer Parker, Amber Scora, Wayne Sermon of Imagine Dragons, and many, many more cool speakers, go to thrivebeyondmormonism.com, register. It's only $15 a person. We plan on losing all sorts of money at this event. We price it at $15 because we want to get as many people there as possible. And we have underwriters who are willing to pay the overages. So we're doing this only to promote healing, growth, and community beyond Mormonism. It's going to be an all positive event. It's no sniping or negativity towards the church. It's about looking forward and doing cool things. So come join me and Laci and a bunch of other cool people and 1,000 other Post-Mormons at the largest Post-Mormon event ever dedicated to healing and growth. So check us out. Again, November 17th, thrivebeyondmormonism.com. Tell your friends. So Laci, we're so thrilled to have you back. Welcome back to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thanks. It's been a while.
Like 2 days. I know you're super busy, so we really appreciate your time.
Sure, yeah.
Tell everyone really quickly about your new podcast, just so that we can plug that right at the beginning.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I started a new podcast recently. It's called Indirect Message, and it is about the internet and the ways that the internet is influencing our relationships, influencing our democracy, influencing our lives. And a lot of it is led by the experiences that I've had, kind of watching the social media empire explode in my time online. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I think that people who are interested in thinking about the internet as a tool more critically will be interested in the topics we talk about.
All right. And I've listened to it. It's a great podcast. So check it out.
Thanks.
All right, Laci. So here's the deal. As you may or may not know, Mormons kind of aren't always the most knowledgeable or experienced when it comes to sex or sexuality. In so many instances, we're taught until we're 21, it's bad, it's awful, stay away, it'll hurt you, it's dangerous. We're not given any real sex education. In fact, I think a lot of times people from the Mormon tradition tend to fight the idea of sex education, oftentimes with the fear that it will encourage and increase sexuality of children and teens if we talk about it. Mm. And then, of course, in these marriages, these Mormon marriages, there's all this porn shaming and body shaming and basically sex negativity that can really be tough for Mormon marriages. And then we've got other issues where when people leave Mormonism, it's like the Kraken has been released. Sometimes we want, as post-Mormons, to become the opposite of whatever we were as Mormon. And sometimes we can lose our way, whether that means, infidelity, whether that means, experimenting with various forms of sexuality, such as, polyamory or swinging or other types of things. And we're not saying any of that stuff is good or bad, only that people can really make a mess of their lives fast, when they haven't gotten good education and good experiences. And so I asked you to pull together a top 10 list of things you should know about sexuality after Mormonism. I don't know if it includes kind of the stuff I just mentioned, but I hope we can address everything you've planned, maybe some of our audience's questions, and maybe some of the things that I talked about in that intro. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. You may have to give me a little more guidance on some of the, I guess I haven't, because I usually work with young adults, some of the stuff you're describing is not really like
your wheelhouse.
In my wheelhouse. Yeah. I mean, I can try to help, but yeah, it's a little bit outside of, those are like caused by other things in life that come later in life, I feel like.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us about your sweet spot of like who it is you've been targeting in your messaging, and just so that we have an understanding for kind of who your message is targeted to.
Yeah, well, for most of my time online, I've been speaking to my peers, which would be people in their 20s. And so a lot of the work that I've done is for usually college students or young adults, even outside of college, who have not really gotten a proper sex education and are sexually active, maybe, or are figuring out their sexual identity, maybe, and are just looking for a little bit more guidance than maybe they've gotten from home, church, and school.
Perfect. Well, then I'll change the title to kind of tweak it for that audience specifically, just so people know exactly who we're targeting.
I mean, I think these things apply broadly.
Yeah.
I will say. Yeah.
All right, good. Well, let's start. Hit us with number one.
All right. Well, I would say that one of the hardest things for me when I first left the church was feeling okay with my body and accepting that my body was not a side of sin, but that it held tremendous potential for my ability to move through the world and also to experience pleasure. And so I think one of the ways to kind of deal with those feelings is to actually learn about your body. And this is more of the, I guess, textbooky side of things. Read the books, do some Googling from reliable resources. There's a lot of crap out there. And learn about body parts as it pertains to sexual pleasure. In sex ed classes, a lot of the time, the anatomy that we get is based around reproduction. And that is also very important to know. But it's also important to know all the ways that your body can make you feel good. Actually my book is I hate to be a self-promoter, but I think my book was written with this in mind. The idea of helping people understand all these facets of our bodies that maybe we don't learn about, that are really helpful to know. Not just for pleasure either, but also for your health. Understanding, you need to know what's normal for you so that you can identify if something is off. Knowing what your body looks like, knowing what your genitals look like, knowing what the parts are, how they should be functioning, what's normal, where things might suggest some medical problems. Those are all helpful things to know.
And when it comes to anatomy, let's just say the male anatomy tends to be a little bit more simple than the female anatomy. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
What are some of the examples of understanding the female anatomy? And by the way, I just put a link up to your book, Sex Plus, Learning, Loving, and Enjoying Your Body. Please check that out, listeners. It's a worthy book for sure. Tell us give us some examples of how understanding the female anatomy better can help enhance the pleasure maybe of both parties involved, assuming there's two parties involved.
Yeah, well, one of the most basic ones is the clitoris, right? Knowing where the clitoris is, how, and experimenting with what kind of touch feels good. everyone's a little bit different and everyone varies in sensitivity. So that's something that, just getting literally in touch with what's going on down there by yourself or with a partner, and understanding what clitoral anatomy is. A lot of people think the clitoris is just on the outside of the body, and that is the most sensitive part of the clitoris, but it actually extends back into the vagina. It kind of flanks the vagina, it goes around it. So that can be helpful for people who are trying to figure out what kinds of penetrative sex feels good. Hitting the clitoris from the back is something that people don't necessarily realize they're doing. But it can be helpful to know, hey, this is about the spot where this is at, and this is something that might feel good.
Okay, so I'm sure a lot of people just think that the tip is all there is to the clitoris. So knowing that it extends farther back and around, that's super important to know.
Yeah, it's got a lot more parts than I think people realize. And
we've learned from Natasha's mentioned before, it's one of the only organs in human anatomy that's 100% dedicated to pleasure. Is that right? Natasha, have that right?
I think it is the only part that exists just for pleasure. And, that's something that I think comes up with religious populations a lot, is if God created you and created this body part, how could God be condemning pleasure? Its only function is to make you feel good. And I think that's pretty cool.
And I think we've talked about this before, but tell me if I'm right. For females, you mentioned it being with a partner, but something that's often forbidden within a Mormon construct is masturbation, or it's discouraged. Interestingly, in recent years, it seems like the church may be backing off on that a little bit. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that a female getting to know her own body, including touching herself in ways that helps her understand how she best experiences joy, can be really helpful. And then, number one, her lifetime of pleasure and joy, but also in her ability to have a really pleasurable experience with her partner. All true?
Yeah. I think it's important to, something that comes up a lot is, because women feel shame about their bodies or have been taught that masturbation or touching themselves is so wrong and so sinful, they are not actually familiar with their own body and kind of expect their partner to just figure everything out. And that's a lot of pressure, to put on a partner to just know everything about your body when they aren't feeling what is happening in your body. But also, I think that, it creates a distance between your mental and emotional experience of sex and your physical experience of sex. So getting in touch with what's going on and knowing how your body works and what feels good is helpful on all fronts, including with a partner.
It's very common, I'm learning, within Mormonism, for a woman to go 10, 15, 20 years and actually never have an orgasm.
Yes.
Because she doesn't know what an orgasm is. And when she has sex, she just says, well, I guess I'm having an orgasm because that's what happens when you have sex. And then once they leave the church and are open to exploration or other sorts of things, they have an orgasm for the first time. And sometimes there's a lot of anger and sadness and grieving when an ex-Mormon woman says, I could have been having this pleasure for my entire life. Mm-hmm. And now I'm discovering this in my 40s or 50s.
Yeah. And I think that's tragic, and that they have been done wrong by all of the things in the world. And this is why I think that sex ed in public school systems is so important, because it shouldn't really matter what someone's religious beliefs are. The right to knowledge about our bodies and how they work is a human right. Like, that is an essential aspect of our physical being. And I know women in my family have experienced this, and it is really difficult for them to work through. But you know what? Life is long, and it's better late than never. And you just got to make up for lost time. You know what I'm saying?
I love it. Really quickly, tell me if you're going to talk about this later. As I remember reading about this sort of stuff in the past, I remember this discussion of a G-spot. Tell me if that's something you were going to cover later, and if that's a myth or if that's a reality, or I think you've covered this on one of your video episodes. Is that right?
Yeah. I've made several videos about it because it's so controversial, this idea of a G-spot. And yeah, the G-spot, which I think is more of like an area, can be thought of more of an area than it's not like an organ, but it refers to a network of glands, paraurethral glands around the urethra, the P-tube. And people have varying degrees of complexity in these networks, but they can be very pleasurable when stimulated for a few reasons. One is there's a lot of nerve endings around that area. It can stimulate the clitoris at the same time. But also, I think people kind of intuitively know this because I don't know if it's the same for males, actually. But if you kind of like clench when you're going to pee, it can feel a little bit pleasurable. It's like the happy pee feeling.
Yeah, we got that. Men have that.
Yeah, so that is activating that network and can be very pleasurable for people to varying degrees. Some people it's like, not doing much for me. And there's some research to suggest that some people actually don't have these networks. So there's a lot of diversity in people's bodies. But for some people, it's very pleasurable and can be the source of powerful orgasms.
One of the other things that couples often strive for is sort of the mutual orgasm. And tell me if you're going to talk about that later, because I don't want to cut off any of the other 9 things you have.
No, the things that I made with this conversation in mind are more like tips, not specific facts, I guess.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. So like what I understand is that while that might be enjoyable, while that might be something to strive for, it's actually quite rare for let's just assume it's male-female sex, although there are lots of types of sex, but for male-female sex, it's actually quite rare for the female to orgasm while the male is inside. Is that true? Not true? What's your understanding about that?
Yeah, the likelihood of people coming to climax at the same exact time is low because everyone's a little different, and also every situation is different. Some people can kind of edge themselves and hold it until their partner is coming, but for the most part, the idea that it just comes out of nowhere all the time and that's just the natural rhythm of sex is wrong. And I think that often serves a male-centered view of sex, where when a guy is orgasming, because women usually take longer, that's when sex is over. And so women kind of get shafted, no pun intended, shafted in the wrong ways, I guess, and don't actually, get to experience pleasure in the same way when sex ends when a guy is done.
So in other words, it may not always be helpful to always try and strive for that, or even to have an expectation or a hope.
Yeah.
Maybe be more creative and be okay with kind of a mutual ascension of pleasure, or even sort of okay, now it's my turn. Okay, now it's your turn type of thing. Is that
totally? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's more messy and organic and chaotic. It's not like this, start, middle, end for both people in the same, capacities. So I would say really get outside of that box if that's how you're thinking about sex.
And sometimes striving for that can actually undermine pleasure for both parties, like getting stressed and, having an expectation and trying to make it be a certain way.
Yeah. I mean, if that happens and it works out that way, great. If it doesn't, great. Like, it doesn't need to be that way to be fun and enjoyable,
Got it. Okay, great. What's number 2? This is good. I love number 1.
Yeah. So number 2 is to get in touch with your own desires. Thinking about, I think we're told to push those feelings down and, learn to really suppress what we like and what excites us and what ignites desire within us, and getting back in touch with those feelings, I think can be really powerful. And it might take some time, and because, if you've been conditioned to push down because of the society we live in that is not always super open, depending on the subculture you're in, So one of the things you can do to get in touch with those desires, if it's difficult for you, is to, people say watch porn. I am actually I'm not anti-porn, but I'm not super like porn is the solution. That's not my school of thought on this. I actually think erotica writing can be a little bit more helpful because it doesn't immerse us in, it's not as psychologically vulnerable, because then you're comparing yourself to the bodies on screen and you're wondering, well, that's not what my sex looks like, right? So when you're reading erotica, it creates more space for you to explore your own fantasies, in my opinion. And also maybe write down your own thoughts, keep a desire journal. There are actually some good tools and resources out there. I think it's called My Fantasy Journal. I can look this up if anyone wants the exact name, but there are books that people have put together to help you explore those thoughts, to kind of go through different sexy things, erotic things, and explore what is interesting, what sounds interesting to you and what doesn't. Another resource for this type of exercise is the yes, no, maybe lists. You can find them floating around all over the internet. There's tons of versions of them now.
What would the yes, no, maybe list be?
So they list all kinds of different types of sexual play, types of stimulation, types of specific sex acts, role play, things like that, to varying degrees of specificity. So some are really specific, like I want my toes sucked on while I am dressed as a maid or whatever. But some are very broad in general, like I'm interested in foot stuff. That is a minority fetish, but still out there. So the yes, no, maybe charts, I think, can be useful, not just in kind of thinking about desire, but also in negotiating your boundaries on them. The lists were created with the intention of helping people say, yes, I am into this. No, I am not into this. Or maybe let's talk about this a little more. And it's a tool to communicate with their partner.
So I'm just, I just pulled up one and I pasted a link to it. So it's got yes, no, maybe, and then it lists anal sex, blindfolds, bondage, cosplay, cunnilingus, which I think anal sex, that's oral sex, right?
Yeah. There's actually I curated a yes, no, maybe list for my book as well. It might be online with stuff that I think will cater to the type of person who maybe hasn't explored as much and is not necessarily like ready to pull out the whips and chains,
Right. That's in your book?
That is in my book. Yeah.
Beautiful. Another reason to buy that book.
Yeah. I put a bunch of exercises and stuff in there that have been useful to me that hopefully can be tools and resources for other people.
Yeah. Cause just as I'm reading through that list, I'm like, whoa, a lot of that stuff is really shocking for me, and I'm sure it's going to be shocking for a lot of the listeners. So
no, they started with the kink community, so a lot of the lists have a lot of kink stuff on there, which is great if you're into that. But it can be a bit intense, I think. Yeah.
Real quick, you talked about erotica, like the first book that comes to my mind is Highlander. Is that right? Is that a famous one? Have you heard about that for women?
The stuff I read is mostly online. Books, not as well versed.
So there are like websites that have text erotica. Like
there are, and where women post their own fantasies and stuff that they write. It's been a while since I've been down that rabbit hole, but if that's of interest, I can send you some links. But the internet is huge. It's not that hard to find sex stuff on there either.
Yeah. Okay. So get in touch with your own desires and understanding your own desire template and your partners. And I guess part of that's being able to talk about it as well. Outlanders. Kimberly McDonald says Outlander. Thanks.
Outlanders. Kimberly. There we go. You were close.
What did I say? Highlander? Outlander.
Yeah. And that actually does bring me to one of the points that I have here as well, which is to start practicing being more verbal about how you feel about with your partner about sexy things. If something is really pleasurable, let them know. If something isn't totally doing it for you, let them know. have conversations about the things you're interested in, and start to cultivate an environment where it's more okay to talk about that stuff. Now, I recognize that's easier said than done if the precedent of your relationship has for a long time been to just sort of let things go unsaid, or we have our own sort of ritual and we got our thing down, right? Breaking out of that can be scary and challenging also, because how do you do that? But, I think that's maybe an area where your expertise is stronger than mine, John, on, helping couples communicate about these things. But just from personal experience, no expert witness here, but I think it's helpful to just kind of like do the Nike move, right? Just do it. Just say it. If there's something that you're thinking about or something that you're feeling, practice just saying it and not apologizing for being open about it.
I can imagine one of the complications about this is, number one, sometimes, every time a partner will be into some things that another partner will maybe even be aversive to.
Yeah, and with that kind of stuff, it's difficult. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so how do you, it opens you up to feeling rejected if you say, hey, I really want to try this, and your partner's like, I have no interest in doing that. And then all of a sudden, something that's supposed to be pleasurable elicits the feelings of rejection and sadness, right?
Yeah. I think this is another resource in the book. Sorry to be plugging it so often,
it's good.
These are all things that, I put in there.
I believe in books.
Hell yeah. I think one of the things that can help with that is before opening up those conversations, if you're worried about that, if it's maybe an unconventional thing, or your partner and that they might be threatened or upset about this, practicing there's some non-judgmental communication stuff in the book about how to talk about maybe a partner's kinks in a way that communicates how you feel without it, like owning how you feel rather than making it about them being dirty and wrong. Like, for instance, I'm really into threesomes or whatever. There are different ways to respond to that, right? So first I'm going to process, that makes me feel really uncomfortable. And why? Am I not enough for you, right? So identifying what about that makes you uncomfortable and being able to own with I statements, well, I feel uncomfortable with that because XYZ, rather than you're really into that. What's wrong with you? Like, am I not enough for you? Sorry, this is really rambly and I'm being inarticulate because it's a complex topic, but
it's great.
Basically, there is a way to think and process first in a way that acknowledges your own reactions and then owns those reactions so that you can have a more productive conversation. It may be the case that you and your partner want different things and have different boundaries and are not okay with the same things. And that's okay. I think the real challenge is in figuring out a way to talk about those things in a way that does not make either person feel like they've done something wrong, their sexuality is wrong or their desires are wrong. Unless their desires are actually not okay, which opens up a whole other can of worms, stuff that is illegal or harmful.
Yeah. I'll refer to Natasha every once in a while just because she's a friend and a real friend of the show. She likes this phrase, don't, yum my yuck. And
don't yuck my yum.
Don't yuck my yum, right? It goes both ways. So don't make other people feel bad for things they like. Don't make me feel bad for the things I like, right?
Yeah. And be critical about your own emotional responses to those things, because I think that's where a lot of people, myself, where I get into, hot water is when I have this like intense emotional reaction. And instead of taking time to process why I feel that way, I sort of externalize it and project and blame my partner for those feelings.
Got it. Okay, I love it. So that was number 3, which was learn to communicate. Start practicing being more verbal about how you feel about sex.
Being more verbal, yeah. And this kind of ties in as well. So another process I had to go through was to identify my own pain points, the things that were causing me guilt and shame and causing me to, how I deal with these feelings is just kind of shut down and remove myself. So how to prevent that from happening. So that's a lot of processing, and, depending on your situation, I think this is where a therapist can be very helpful, because it's not necessarily something that you should process with a partner, all of it, it's something that is about you as a person, and your partner can support you in that journey, but can't necessarily facilitate that journey themselves. So some of the things to be processing are figuring out the types of things that you've learned trigger feelings of shame, and looking at your coping mechanisms with that shame. Some people shut down, some people lash out, some people turn to the internet, they turn to porn, some people drink, or they'll do drugs, depending on, compounding factors in their life. There are a lot of things that can come together and create a toxic stew. So really looking at your coping mechanisms. And if you need help with those coping mechanisms, that's another point where a professional can really help, guide you toward healthier ways of dealing with those feelings. And then also on that topic as well, in processing the pain points and in dealing with internal feelings of shame, is to become more aware of, be paying more attention to how those reactions that you have affect your kids, if you have them. Because kids pick up on, if you're shaming your body or something, and talking down about your body all the time, your kids are listening. They pick up on that, and can internalize the relationship that you have with your body, even if that's not really the intention. And a lot of the young adults that I have met and talked to about their relationship with their parents, this is one that comes up. I'm going to assume that, as a critical thinking community here, you're probably not, body shaming your kids and telling them they're ugly or whatever. But this does also happen, where parents just talk down to their kids and think it'll encourage them to eat healthier or, take better care of themselves, have better hygiene. The parents shame the kid, but then the kid comes and talks to me and has all these internalized problems years later because, they feel like their parents hated them or couldn't accept them for who they were. So that's also just something to be aware of if you have kids.
I've seen that a lot where parents just think, oh, you'll be bullied if you're heavier, you'll be unhealthy, you might develop, diseases that you don't want. And so I'll make comments at your meal, not mean ones, but just like, be careful what you eat, or watch out what you're doing, or, oh, you need to go exercise, or whatever it is. You can send your kids subtle messages about their body and their weight that can actually really cause unintended harm for a long time.
Yeah. That's not to say that I don't think that people should talk about health. They absolutely should. That's the parents' job to of course you want to keep your kids healthy. I think there are ways to talk about it though, and that don't make them feel shame about their body. So if the issue is that they're eating a bunch of crap, and not eating very healthy, don't make it about weight, right? Make it about how, you can become malnourished if you're not getting all of your vitamins and minerals, or this puts you at risk for heart disease down the line. And hey, maybe you don't realize that right now, but it starts now. And trying to, if you're having those conversations, trying to direct it to be just about health, not about how they look, not about their value as a person. It's very important to accompany those conversations with positive affirmation. I love you no matter what. I'm going to always be here, making it a really positive, safe environment, make them feel safe. If they feel like they're being judged, that's not a safe place anymore. And home should be a safe place, in my opinion.
I love it.
Yeah. So, that would be what number are we on?
I got 5. I got 5 so far.
We got 5. All right. We're out of order here. So let me look at my list. Oh, well, we've touched on some of these things. Well, since we were just talking about affirming, this is a good transition, I think, to affirm yourself, practice affirming yourself, and also affirming your partner. So kind of going out of your way to uplift each other and to uplift yourself just on a regular basis. Make it a habit to be grateful for each other, to express gratitude when your partner goes out of your way for you, to express gratitude for the things that your body does for you, for having great health today, or, not having as much pain today, or whatever it may be, finding ways to be in touch with the wonderful things that our bodies do for us and that sexuality can do for us, and verbalizing that, being more vocal.
Now, this is probably going to be obvious to some, but maybe not for others, but I want to be explicit about it. Well, some would say, what does being complimentary or kind or generous or affirming with your partner outside of the bedroom have to do with the bedroom? And again, I know it's kind of a softball, easy thing, but can we just kind of explicitly address how sort of emotional intimacy can often really be an important prerequisite for physical intimacy?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when you're going through your relationship and building intimacy, sex is not removed from every other aspect of your relationship. Sex is really integrated into the entirety of your lives. And so if there are problems and a feeling of like maybe your partner doesn't value you or appreciate you, or maybe you're fighting a lot, you feel like your partner criticizes you a lot, there's tension in the relationship, of course, that bleeds over to sex. And of course, affirming each other is not going to like put a Band-Aid on underlying problems in a relationship. But in a healthy relationship, I think it can help to keep morale high and to, inject some of those sweet, intimate moments into your day that will make sexy time feel better later on, because you're already setting the stage and having that be a regular part of your relationship. Not like, oh, well, there's going to be a bunch of chaos, and then, well, at night we're going to have sex and that's going to be totally removed from the chaos, because it's not. It's all connected.
I know Margie tells me a lot that for her, when we are really connected, when I'm helping with, around the house, when I'm helping with the kids, and most importantly, when we're able to have talk time where we're sharing our thoughts, our feelings, where I'm listening, I'm being a good listener to her about her day, where I'm being an emotionally attentive and listening spouse, that's a turn on for her.
Yeah, 100%, because it creates a feeling of safety. It builds trust. And it's hot. It's hot to know that, you got your person and they're there for you and they understand you and they see you. And that's a very powerful feeling. So cultivating a healthy relationship in general, 100%. It's very sweet. And I think more couples should focus on that. That does actually tie into another tip that I had, which is to set aside time for you guys. That could be time to play in a sexual way. It could be time to just play, go out hiking, go out for dinner, go for a walk, whatever you're able to muster in our busy daily lives. I think making time for each other, even if it's just, I don't know, a half hour, an hour. I'm in a really privileged position. I don't have kids, family, things to worry about. So an hour sounds reasonable to me every day, but I think that those kinds of things are important in cultivating intimacy and making time for sex, because sometimes life's just too busy and people put sex on the back burner.
Yeah. So if you can, on the one hand, I think, if you can schedule your exercise time, if you can schedule work time, if you can schedule time with the kids, why not schedule time for sexual intimacy or emotional intimacy or whatever it is? On the other hand, one of the things that comes to my mind is that if it's like, there's always that stereotype of it being scheduled and rote and mechanical.
Yeah.
And so you have to balance, I'm guessing, having it not be too scheduled or too formal, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can't just like put sex on a calendar every week and call it a day. That's not super hot. There need to be moments of spontaneity. And when I say scheduling time for sex, I don't even mean like whatever idea of sex, usually just penetrative sex that people have, but just like touching and kissing and cuddling, watching a movie, anything that brings you physically closer together. I think something I've observed in people who have had really long-term relationships, they sort of stop touching each other as much and maybe don't realize it. And, I don't think this is a cure-all for a relationship. And sometimes there are underlying problems that make people not want to touch each other as much, which is a separate issue. But in general, that physical contact is really important, whether it's sexual or not. But yeah, and having that be regular, but also creating space for maybe feeling horny one night,
Right. I one of the things and I'll just be vulnerable, one of the things that we've experienced some, not a lot, but some, is the downside of being orgasm oriented in sex.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is sometimes based on various factors, whether it's age or frequency or stresses or illness or just body types or whatever, sometimes, if the goal is orgasm, not only can that be problematic in terms of, not being always achievable and thus viewed as sort of a failure if it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I found that striving always for the orgasm can actually make an orgasm less likely in some situations. And then Margie and I, either of us would feel like a failure if the other didn't have that experience. And then we realized at some point, wait a minute, we just rolled around together. We were touching our bodies together. We were looking in each other's eyes. We were emotionally intimate. We were connecting. How about that was just a lovely experience, and neither of us needs to frame ourselves or the time together a failure if for some reason the other isn't able to achieve a climax.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really well said. And I think it's really, really important. It's easy to get caught up in orgasm. Like, what's the point of sex without orgasm? It's like, there's so many points to sex without orgasm. And yeah, the intimacy and just the romance and sweet lovingness of it all, being intimate with your lover is, I think, really important. One thing I was going to say along those lines is that, if you're having an issue with sort of thinking of orgasm as the goalpost, is to set aside time, like we were talking about, some playtime, with the deliberate intention of, this playtime is not for orgasms. This playtime is just to explore what feels good. There's actually some like workshops in LA where people go for an hour and like do clitoris stuff for an hour with no, like, orgasm is just not on the table. The idea is we're just going to play around for an hour. People usually end up orgasming a lot, I hear, at these workshops. But just because part of it is creating the emotional space and saying, look, this is not a expectation. This is not even what we're doing right now. Right now, we're just feeling good and figuring out what kinds of touch and stimulation feel nice and experimenting, exploring. And I think that can be really powerful. And it's a nice gift too for your partner. Like, hey, tonight is all about you. For the next hour or two, it's just us. It's just you. That can be a really wonderful, enjoyable thing.
I'm just remembering a term from my PhD training called sensate focus. Is that a term you're familiar with?
Sensate focus. No, I'm not familiar.
I'll just read it. It's a sex therapy technique introduced by the Masters and Johnson team. They go back into the 50s, I think. I think they're kind of older school. But it basically says that what's that?
They're OG.
They're OGs, yeah.
Yeah.
It says it works by refocusing the participants on their own sensory perceptions and sensuality instead of goal-oriented behavior focused on the genitals and penetrative sex. So
there you go. Exactly.
I just pulled a term out from a couple years ago.
Hell yeah. Look at you, Mr. Textbook.
All right. Well, that's good. And I'm sure some of my listeners are like, hey, what are these workshops? I want to learn all about it.
Well, there's some controversy around them, so I don't want to put out the names, but there's all kinds of couples workshops out there. Let's just say.
Email Laci Green at. Okay, cool. That's good. So set aside time for your relationship. I love it.
Yeah, to play. Set aside time to play, whatever that might mean to you that day.
I love it.
Okay. What do we at? My list
that was 7.
That was all messy. Okay. Let's see.
But we don't have to do exactly 10, or we can do 9, or whatever. It's okay.
All right, sure. Well, here's one we haven't really talked about yet, which is getting the right equipment for playtime. I would say the very, very basics for a couple where one of them is female is to have a vibrator, and some nice body safe lube for sexy time. That's kind of like stuff that I think everyone should have in their drawer, because the vibrator, or any kind of toy that they like to help with clitoral stimulation, I think that's a good tool to have, because penetrative sex for most women is not ideal for orgasm. So if you have some other tools in your toolbox, I think it can make it more pleasurable for both people. It's also just a good tool for pleasure, period. Masturbation, exploration, and lube is really important. Like, everyone should have lube when they're having sex, because ouch.
Tell me again, for some, this is going to be super obvious. For many newly, questioning or ex-Mormons, there's going to be no experience with this stuff. What in the world can the role of a vibrator be in sex between two people?
Well, during penetrative sex, you can use the vibrator on your clitoris.
Okay.
And I think that is the ticket for a lot of people. There are a lot of different toys out there, and this can be a fun date night if you're open to it. Going to a sex shop, I would suggest going to a female-friendly sex shop, not porny, dark, scary, weird sex shop that makes you feel uncomfortable. You should feel very safe there. And just check out what's there. But I think that having some sort of aids, because penetrative sex does not necessarily hit the clitoris very well in a lot of positions, having an additional resource there makes it more pleasurable.
Are there any are you aware of any vibrators that are really popular because they're received really well by those who use them, just as tips?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many now. It's such a huge industry. But my personal favorite that I've had for years is the Lilo vibrators. They're made with silicone. They're more expensive. They're like $100 to $150, but I've had mine for over a decade, and it's still going. So it's really high quality stuff, and it's very basic, nothing like scary. The materials are really safe and easy to clean, last a really long time. They're rechargeable. And the batteries obviously go for a very long time. That vibrator is very well loved, and it is still marching on. So I'd say that that's a pretty safe bet.
How do you pronounce Lilo?
How do you pronounce Lilo?
How do you spell it? Sorry.
Lelo.
Okay, Lelo.
Yeah, that's my favorite brand. But look, there's a ton of brands out there, and at different price points. You just kind of got to look around. But solid recommend on the Lilo. As far as lubricant, I would just say don't use the stuff they sell at Target. KY, Astroglide, all of the ones that are out there are good for male masturbation, not good for female bodies. A lot of them have sugar in them. They have glycerin, and can cause pain. For years, I had no idea why it hurt so bad, but it was the lube. It was irritating me. And that happens a lot. So I wouldn't use it internally. Externally, whatever you're doing, fine. But internally, I would say get yourself a nice body safe lube. What are some good ones? The one that I usually use is called Uber Lube. It's a silicone-based lube, and it's great. very simple formula, body safe. You only need a very little bit of it, so it lasts a really long time. I sound like a spokesperson right now, but these are honestly just my personal faves.
Yeah, I'm not aware of you getting any payment off of your interview with me, that's for sure.
Yeah, or I mean, I
Or
used to get
endorsements,
paid for talking about sex toys. I used to do more of that stuff, but
yeah.
how many sex toys can you try before you start saying the same thing over and over, you know?
Sure. So get the right equipment for sex, vibrators, lube, etc.
Yeah.
Have a date night going to a reputable female-friendly sex shop to see what might enhance your pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of independent. That's the other thing. There's lots of like independent little sex shops around. I don't know about Salt Lake City. I've never been there, but about in a lot of the cities, they have a few of these shops, like Babeland. Good Vibes is my absolute favorite. That's in the Bay Area, California. But I've been like to little towns in Maine, right, where there's women that started their own shops that are women and LGBT friendly. And it's always a lot of fun because they're really knowledgeable and they make you feel, really comfortable. And yeah, it's a good time.
I've heard of Blue Boutique in Utah. I've heard of Dr. John's. So those are two that I've heard of in the Utah area for those who might be interested. Never been in one, I don't think.
Really?
I don't think.
It's weird. It's like these days, because there's so many kinds, it's like all these like whirring gizmo, gadgets and stuff. A lot of that stuff is, not that great, yeah. I'll say. But there are a few like, stable favorites that
trusted
have stood
brands.
The test of time. Yes.
All right.
Stood the test of time.
That's good. That's a good tip. Get the right equipment.
Yeah. It's just basic, simple stuff. Have around. It'll really the return on investment is really good on all of that stuff. So let's see what I have left on this list that we have not talked about yet. Okay. One of these things, we may have touched on it, is about understanding and communicating your own boundaries. Something that I think I had really internalized while I was a Mormon was the idea that and this is not just Mormonism either. I think this is like a cultural thing about how women are socialized. We learn to just say yes and to grin and bear it, even when you're not comfortable, even when you're not cool with it. I've talked to a lot of young women who are in college who literally feel like they need to have sex because they feel bad telling someone no. And so that's a big problem. Nobody should feel like they have to do something because they'll be so devastatingly rude if they don't. And Mormons in particular, they're so nice and polite and sweet and kind. And, I think the problem of feeling like you can't say no is maybe turned up a bit in that environment. So, I think it's really important to know your own boundaries and know that it is okay to say, no, thanks. I'm not into that. I don't like this. I'm not comfortable. This doesn't feel good. Things like that. You can tailor your tone and how you say it to the situation, but in general, it's not wrong to say no. And it's not wrong to communicate when you're uncomfortable. In fact, it's very okay and important to say something when you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, one of the topics that I really enjoyed the way you've talked about them is just this topic of consent. And there are two big problems with at least two big problems when it comes to consent in Mormonism. One is that we never talk about it. Like, I don't think the term sexual consent has ever come up in any Mormon chapel ever in the history of Mormonism. Now, I'm exaggerating. I'm sure there might be some rare instances where it has, but we just don't talk about consent. I think it's a really important topic. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that a lot of people, when they think of consent, they think about, when you're dating someone in a frat or a sorority and you're in college, that's when consent applies. But I don't think we even think about consent being an important topic within a committed relationship or even within marriage. Are those two things your experience as well?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of confusion about what consent looks like in the context of long-term relationships or marriage, because the idea is about consent in general is a sex act is consensual so long as someone doesn't say no. And even if they're like, no, it's still considered negotiable for some reason. Like, oh, come on, you want to, there's a lot of convincing and pressuring that is considered socially acceptable. And yeah, I think that every couple has to sort of be on the same page about what your boundaries are and really listening to each other and create an environment where it's okay to say, no, this is not cool with me, or no, not right now, or, here's how I'm feeling. The context, right, needs to be open. The communication needs to be open so that it feels okay to say those things. I'm not of the opinion that people need to get explicit consent in the way that young adults hooking up in college do when they're married. The context is different. There's already this established precedent of trust and respect. And so that changes things a little bit. That said, those things should still be conversations, and if someone is feeling like their boundaries are not being respected, those are important things to be able to talk about. And also just talking about, and sorry if this is repetitive, but just talking about those boundaries to begin with, I like it when sometimes I don't like it when you're initiating sex really late at night and I'm trying to sleep. That makes me uncomfortable because, I feel bad rejecting you, but I'm exhausted. Those kinds of conversations need to happen and lay the foundation for open communication in the long run.
Very nice. Thomas, one of our listeners, is chiming in. He's making a plug for Husband and Wife Boutique in Lehi, Utah. No, he says it's an American Fork. He corrected himself. And then he said there's a Dirty Joe Punsters in Spanish Fork. He says it sounds dirty, but it's a great shop. So
okay.
Thomas is making some recommendations.
Nice. Yeah, as long as people... I think going to a sex shop, if you've never been to one, it's already a little bit of a jarring experience. And I think clean and bright tend to be my preference for the types of stores that I go into.
Not
but
dark
I realize,
and dingy. Dark and dingy isn't your thing.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of creeps me out a little bit. Yeah. It makes me feel like, oh, this is so scary and shameful and like, ugh, I don't know. But, there's not always a lot of choices either. And right. I definitely encourage people to support their local shops.
Thomas says, I've noticed that it's great to go look on the sex shop and get info and ask questions. The people who work there are down to earth and knowledgeable, but then look online for the product you're interested in, because usually I think you can find products a lot cheaper. I'm sure that's true, and I'm sure it's sad for the retailers to have you use their experience and then go buy the product online. So that's that's probably a tricky balance to.
I think I mean, I can't shame people for wanting to, get the most bang for their buck, but also if you have the means to support your local shops, I think that's important as well, because otherwise they can't exist, and the world's changing. A lot of real what are they called? Brick and mortar.
Brick and mortar.
It's like meat space shops. A lot of brick and mortar shops are not able to keep their doors open because, well, the world's changing. But right. I like to think that sex shops serve a really important role in our culture in helping people feel comfortable and be educated.
Melanie writes, it always bothered me that consent was not talked about in church. I know married women who feel they owe their partner sex because it is part of the marriage contract. She says that is not healthy sex. Is that not healthy sex, Laci?
You know the answer to that. I rule this not healthy sex. Yeah, I think there's a lot of feeling like you owe someone. And
there's that term putting out, right? I put out for my spouse.
Right? Yeah. There's a lot of pressure, and I think that's really unhealthy. And it's not necessarily, there's a spectrum of unhealthy behaviors here. It's not sexual assault per se, but it's definitely getting into some weird coercive precedents, right? Where you don't really have a choice about what you do with your body. And I think that should really give everyone pause to really think about what that means.
Robert writes, so glad to see Laci again. So much respect for her. I'm an instant fan of Indirect Message.
Oh, nice. Thanks so much. That's really sweet. I'm really glad. Thanks, Rob.
And Robert writes, I can watch now, but I'll catch up later. I've actually wanted these interviews to happen for many years now. I can't contain how excited I am about this. Well, we're making Robert happy.
Great. Well, that makes my day much better.
Thanks for writing in, Robert.